the World Bank, IMF, was coming and borrowing you in dollars. And countries that have higher levels of foreign denominated debt are at higher risk of default, right? South Africa, in your second question, you talk about debt in South Africa. South Africa's foreign denominated debt is only 10%. So we are not at risk of default. We can afford a UBEC, right? So going back to that question of debt as a global phenomenon, debt in a way works to reproduce the inequalities between countries. So African countries will always be punished. Global South countries will always be punished. Debt will be used to push them into neoliberal policy. You get a World Bank loan, guess what you get? Conditionalities. And what do conditionalities mean? You have to implement neoliberalism. So debt is not a neutral tool. Debt is a tool of power. So when you see during COVID, what happened is that developed countries increased their debt by almost 20%, 15 to 20%. Developing countries, or let me say low-income countries, increased their debt by less than 10%. And what does that mean? They weren't responding to the country's needs during COVID. They let people die of hunger, right? And when they came back to the market, they still had to borrow money at a higher cost when they were disciplined during COVID than the countries who just let their debt grow. So there's a whole political economy of debt and why African or global South countries, are seen as, the average debt on the African continent is 45%, I think, debt to GDP ratio. Average. For developing countries, that's very low because you need debt in a way to develop. And coming back to UBEC, I'm one of the economists who are a big proponent of UBEC, basic income grant. One, fundamentally, because it's in our constitution, it says that everybody has the right to social assistance. It doesn't say if you're over 50, if you're under, it says everyone. Where our constitution is explicit, it's explicit. So I'm a person who really believes our macroeconomic policy must reflect our constitution, right? Because even the fiscal frameworks are in our constitution themselves. And then two, I think obviously the basic income grant, I always ask this question, what is the cost of not implementing a basic income grant? We're spending like 36 billion per year. What's our budget? Just over 2 trillion. We're spending 36 billion on the SRD currently. To me, that's minuscule compared to the larger budgets. Right? So what is the cost of not assisting people? And my thing, my chat, I guess, is always, unless National Treasury can guarantee us jobs, if they can guarantee us jobs tomorrow, it's fine, they can keep the basic income grant. But if they can't guarantee us jobs, then they have to give people the basic income grant. Because fundamentally, the unemployment is a failure of macroeconomic or government policy in itself. The fact that people are unemployed is a failure of government, and therefore, who should bear the costs of the failures? Right? Why is it the people that must bear the costs? But anyway, without preaching too much, I'm pro basic income grant. But it doesn't mean that grants over jobs. I do think jobs are still important. But in our current context, I can't foresee that we're going to generate those jobs for as long as we continue on this economic path. There's just, you saw the trend there. The unemployment has always been. So the more we do the same, the more we're going to get the same unemployment level.
You had your hand goes to, you just have two projects, I'm sorry, there's just one mic, and I'm going to have time to go up down the mic. Guys,
So I think I just put up the graph here again to say that this graph wasn't really about tax, to say it was about the income differentials. So of course the people who earn more, the top 10%, get taxed more. So South Africa does have a progressive tax system. Those who earn less pay less taxes, those who earn more pay more taxes. But of course then we've got taxes like VAT, which everybody pays. You pay VAT, even a child buying a sweet pays VAT. Everybody pays VAT, right? Fuel levies and other taxes that are indirect. Indirect taxes tend to impact everyone, but personal income tax is based on where you are in these categories. Can the wealthy avoid and evade tax? Yes. Do people structure their finances so they pay less tax? Yes. Do you get rebates when you pay for your retirement? Yes. Do you get rebates for medical aid? Yes. Right? And who's paying for that? The wealthier, right? So again, it's the conversation about effective tax rate. What do people actually pay? We've got statutory rates. Everybody who earns $1 million above should be paying 45%, but it doesn't mean everybody pays 45%. So just a clarification. In terms of the question about it, the comparison. So what the point Ben Fine is making in this is to say that the apartheid state was a developmental state because they were like, this is what we want to do, even though it's for the minority. There was a clear agenda. We want electricity for a minority. We want profits for a minority. We want banks for a minority. And what do? They execute it. That's the difference, right? So the comparison is not to say that was a better state. It was to say in that time, that state was willing to do whatever it took to provision for that minority, whatever it takes. So Eskom, bailouts, they borrowed a lot of money to build Eskom. They borrowed a lot of money to finance the military, to continue the social order, right? But that's a lot of economic planning and execution. So the argument here is to say our current state, because it's so focused on being an enabling state for the private sector, is not doing that kind of investments that we need to see, right? So Eskom's debt ballooned to 400 billion. And I remember one of my first things that I wrote as an economist was that bail out Eskom. Back then the debt was even lower. And then it ballooned. And now they're bailing out Eskom and they're realizing, oh, Eskom actually, when we give the money, the debt gets less, obviously. But it's less than what we thought would pay. So to me, you don't wait for state-owned entities to crash. You don't sell them. You don't privatize them. When you're a developmental state, you acknowledge that state-owned entities play a function. And there was a question I didn't answer about electricity, something. But to say if Eskom is privatized, we're going to see rapid increases in the price of electricity. They're going to unplug most of this country, if we're being honest. Municipalities are already doing that, but if it's privatized, best believe a lot more people will not have electricity because they're going to be a private company. And you can see this in the UK where they privatized a lot of services, that the numbers actually went up rapidly. And funny enough, the UK now is trying to what's the word now? I don't know what the opposite of privatizing, but trying to pull back into the public sector the water system. And that's going to cost them a lot of money to buy out that private sector. Right? So we're now in the era where, nationalize, that's what I was looking for. So we're now in the era where people privatized and are now trying to return to nationalization. So we've seen that privatizing doesn't necessarily work. And there's a lot of great examples of why it doesn't work, and including, and I'll give the last example, the Gautrain. Anybody, obviously, I hope most of you know what the Gautrain is. You never know. So the Gautrain, we entered into a private-public partnership with a company to build the Gautrain. And guess what? Our government is still, to this day, we are paying that private company because it's making losses. The Gautrain is being funded through the fiscus. And that private company's profits are guaranteed. No matter what happens to the Gautrain, they'll always be the winner. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation today. We'll see you on Friday.